"I have 4 doctorates," said the poor girl. The rich billionaire laughed, but she silenced him. "Before we continue, please comment on which part of the world you are watching from." The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel cast dancing shadows across marble floors as New York's elite gathered for the annual Children's Future Foundation Gala. Designer gowns rustled against tailored tuxedos, while champagne glasses clinked in celebration of another successful fundraising evening. At the center of it all stood Amir al-Rashid, the 38-year-old oil magnate whose net worth exceeded most small countries' GDP. Amir adjusted his platinum cufflinks, surveying the opulent ballroom with the practiced eye of someone who owned 3 such hotels across Manhattan. Tonight's event would raise millions for underprivileged children, a tax-deductible gesture that enhanced his public image while barely scratching his vast fortune. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spend more on tonight's champagne than most families earned in a year. "Mr. al-Rashid," his personal assistant Marcus approached discreetly. "There's a small situation outside. Security found an elderly woman and her granddaughter selling flowers near the entrance. They're causing a disturbance with some guests." Amir barely glanced up from his conversation with the mayor's wife. "Handle it quietly. I don't want any unpleasantness tonight." But fate had different plans. Through the gleaming windows, a small figure caught his attention. A 7-year-old girl with untamed auburn curls and eyes that sparkled with unusual intelligence. She clutched a bouquet of slightly wilted roses, her oversized coat hanging loosely on her tiny frame. Despite her circumstances, she carried herself with a dignity that seemed far beyond her years. What Amir couldn't have predicted was that this seemingly ordinary encounter would challenge everything he believed about worth, intelligence, and the true meaning of success. The little girl named Scarlett was about to turn his world upside down with 4 simple words that would echo through his conscience forever. The commotion began when Scarlett accidentally bumped into Mrs. Pemberton, the wife of a prominent senator, while trying to sell her flowers near the hotel's golden revolving doors. The security guards, dressed in black suits that cost more than Scarlett's grandmother earned in 6 months, quickly surrounded the pair. "Ma'am, you can't solicit here," the head of security announced firmly to Scarlett's grandmother, Rosa. "This is a private event." Rosa, her weathered hands trembling slightly, tried to explain in broken English that they were just trying to earn enough money for dinner. But the guards were unmoved, and the situation escalated when Mrs. Pemberton dramatically claimed her dress had been ruined by the dirty flowers. "Bring them inside," Amir commanded when Marcus updated him on the situation. "I'll handle this personally." His decision wasn't born from kindness, but from a desire to quickly resolve the matter before it became a social media nightmare. In today's world, even the smallest incident could spiral into negative publicity. As Scarlett and her grandmother were escorted into the opulent ballroom, whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Jeweled women clutched their pearls while men in designer suits shook their heads in disapproval. The contrast was stark. Scarlett's patched jeans and worn sneakers against the backdrop of a room where a single flower arrangement cost more than most people's monthly rent. Amir approached them with the calculated stride of a man accustomed to commanding every room he entered. His presence commanded immediate silence from the nearby guests, all eager to witness how the billionaire would handle this embarrassing intrusion. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding," Amir said, his voice carrying the subtle accent of his Lebanese heritage mixed with years of American business education. He looked down at Scarlett, who stood protectively close to her grandmother, her chin raised defiantly despite being surrounded by New York's most powerful people. "We just wanted to sell some flowers, sir," Rosa said quietly, her eyes downcast. "We didn't mean any trouble." But Scarlett stepped forward, her green eyes meeting Amir's dark brown ones without flinching. "I have 4 doctorates," she said simply, as if commenting on the weather. The ballroom erupted in laughter. Mrs. Pemberton's high-pitched giggle cut through the air like a knife, while several men slapped their knees in amusement. Even the waiters, trained to remain invisible, struggled to hide their smiles. 4 doctorates, Amir repeated, his own lips curving into an amused smile. "And what might those be in little one?" Scarlett's expression didn't waver. "Applied mathematics with specialization in quantum algorithms, theoretical physics focusing on particle acceleration, comparative linguistics covering 12 language families, and international economics with emphasis on emerging market dynamics." The laughter grew louder. Someone in the crowd called out, "Next she'll tell us she's cured cancer." Another voice added, "Maybe she can solve world hunger too." Amir felt a surge of entertainment at the child's elaborate fantasy. Clearly, she had overheard these terms somewhere and was repeating them to sound important. It was almost endearing in its absurdity. "Those are very impressive claims," he said patronizingly, "the way adults speak to children who insist they can fly. And where exactly did you earn these doctorates?" "Online certification programs, independent research, and correspondence with universities worldwide," Scarlett replied matter-of-factly. "The internet has made advanced education accessible to anyone with curiosity and dedication, regardless of their economic circumstances." The crowd's amusement reached a crescendo. Mrs. Pemberton dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, overwhelmed by what she perceived as the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. "Sas, Amir," she gasped between laughs. "You really must do something about the education system if children think Google searches count as doctoral degrees." But something in Scarlett's unwavering composure gave Amir pause. Most children would have crumbled under such public ridicule, yet she stood there with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. Her grandmother placed a protective hand on her shoulder, whispering for her to stay quiet, but Scarlett gently stepped away. "Would you like me to prove it?" she asked, her young voice cutting through the laughter with surprising authority. The laughter died down to curious murmurs as Scarlett's challenge hung in the air. Amir found himself genuinely intrigued by the child's persistence. In his world of corporate negotiations and million-dollar deals, he could usually spot a bluff within seconds, yet something about this 7-year-old's demeanor suggested she wasn't merely playing pretend. "Prove it." Amir raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "And how exactly would you do that, young lady?" Before Scarlett could answer, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Columbia University's Dean of Mathematics and one of the evening's honored guests, stepped forward from the crowd. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her sharp blue eyes sparkled with academic curiosity behind wire-rimmed glasses. "If I may, Mr. Al-Rashid," Dr. Hartwell interjected with a slight smile, "I'd be happy to pose a few questions. After all, if this delightful child truly possesses such knowledge, it would be quite remarkable." The crowd buzzed with excitement. This was turning into the evening's most unexpected entertainment. Smartphones appeared as guests began recording what they assumed would be an amusing spectacle of a child's imagination being gently deflated by academic reality. Dr. Hartwell approached Scarlett with the kind demeanor of someone who had spent decades working with gifted students. "Let's start with something simple, dear. Can you explain the fundamental principle behind quantum superposition?" Scarlett's eyes lit up. Quantum superposition is the principle that quantum particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed or measured. For example, an electron can spin both clockwise and counterclockwise at the same time until we measure it, at which point the wave function collapses into a definite state. This is fundamentally different from classical physics, where objects have definite properties at all times. Dr. Hartwell's eyebrows shot up. The crowd's chatter quieted noticeably. That wasn't the response anyone had expected from a 7-year-old selling flowers. "Interesting," the professor mused. "Can you give me a practical application of this principle?" "Quantum computing," Scarlett replied without hesitation. "By utilizing superposition, quantum computers can process exponentially more information than classical computers. Each quantum bit, or qubit, can represent both 0 and 1 simultaneously, allowing for parallel processing that makes certain calculations theoretically instantaneous. This has implications for cryptography, drug discovery, and financial modeling." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Pemberton's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Even the experienced waitstaff had stopped their service to listen. Amir felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't possible. Children didn't speak about quantum mechanics with such clarity and understanding. Yet here was this small girl, standing calmly in her patched clothes, discussing concepts that challenged graduate students. Dr. Hartwell's academic composure cracked slightly. "My dear child, where did you learn such things?" "MIT OpenCourseWare, Stanford's online physics lectures, and correspondence with Professor Nakamura at Tokyo University," Scarlett answered. "Mati, I also completed IBM's quantum computing certificate program last year. though I had to have Grandma Rosa help me submit the final project since they required an adult signature. Professor James Morrison from Harvard's economics department, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward with obvious skepticism. If you claim to understand economics, perhaps you can explain the current situation in emerging markets. Scarlett turned to him politely. Are you referring to the currency volatility in South Asian markets due to the recent shift in Federal Reserve policy, or the broader implications of China's Belt and Road Initiative on African economic development? Both are creating interesting arbitrage opportunities, though the geopolitical risks are substantial. Professor Morrison's face went pale. He had literally discussed these exact topics in a closed-door economic summit just last week. The carry trade opportunities in the Turkish lira have become particularly attractive, Scarlett continued, though I'd recommend hedging against political instability. The correlation between oil prices and emerging market currencies has also shifted significantly since the pandemic, creating new models for risk assessment. Amir's worldview was crumbling with every word this child spoke. In his 38 years of life, through Harvard Business School and countless boardroom encounters with the world's most brilliant minds, he had never encountered anyone, adult or child, who could speak so fluently across such diverse and complex subjects. The ballroom had fallen into complete silence. Even the background music seemed to have stopped. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Amir's mind raced as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. This wasn't some clever child repeating memorized phrases. Scarlett was demonstrating genuine understanding of concepts that most adults couldn't grasp. The confidence in her voice, the way she connected seemingly unrelated ideas, the casual manner in which she referenced academic sources. It was impossible, yet it was happening right before his eyes. Dr. Hartwell broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Child, what's your name?" "Scarlett," she replied, unconsciously straightening her small shoulders. "Scarlett Williams." "Scarlett," Dr. Hartwell repeated, kneeling down to meet the girl at eye level. "How old are you, sweetheart?" "7 years old, ma'am." "I'll be 8 next month." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. 7 years old. The number seemed to echo in everyone's mind, each repetition making the situation more surreal. Amir felt his chest tighten as the full implications began to sink in. This child, this brilliant, extraordinary child, was living in poverty, selling flowers on the street, while her mind harbored knowledge that could reshape industries. Mrs. Pemberton, who had earlier laughed the loudest, now stood frozen with her mouth slightly agape. The same woman who had complained about her dress being ruined by smashes by dirty flowers was staring at a child whose intellectual capacity exceeded that of most PhD candidates. "Scarlett," Professor Morrison said, his voice shaking slightly, "you mentioned completing an IBM certification. Do you have any documentation of your achievements?" Rosa, who had been standing quietly beside her granddaughter, reached into a worn canvas bag and pulled out a carefully protected folder. With trembling hands, she handed it to Professor Morrison. Inside were certificates, printed emails, and correspondence from universities around the world, all bearing Scarlett's name. As Professor Morrison examined the documents, his expression shifted from skepticism to astonishment to something resembling awe. These are genuine," he announced to the crowd. "MIT OpenCourseware completion certificates, Stanford correspondence, IBM quantum computing certification, all legitimate." Dr. Hartwell took the folder and reviewed its contents, her experienced eye quickly identifying authentic academic credentials. "This is unprecedented," she murmured. "I've been in academia for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Amir found himself studying Scarlett with new eyes. Her clothes were clearly second-hand, her shoes worn thin from walking, yet she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew her own worth. How had he missed it? How had any of them missed the intelligence that practically radiated from her small frame? "Scarlett," he said, his voice softer now, stripped of its earlier condescension. "Why didn't you tell us about your education when you first came in?" Scarlett tilted her head slightly, as if the question confused her. "You didn't ask, sir. You and your friends were already laughing before I could explain properly. I've learned that most adults don't listen to children, especially poor ones." The words hit Amir like a physical blow. The casual way she delivered this observation, without bitterness or accusation, simply as a statement of fact, made it even more devastating. She was right. They had judged her based on her appearance, her age, her circumstances. They had laughed at her claims without bothering to investigate their validity. "How do you learn all this?" asked Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned linguist from Yale who had remained silent until now. "With your situation. The public library has free internet," Scarlett explained matter-of-factly. "I go there every day after Grandma Rosa finishes her cleaning job at the office building. The librarians are very kind. Mrs. Peterson helped me set up email accounts so I could correspond with professors. She even let me use the printer for my certifications." Rosa stepped forward slightly, her weathered face glowing with pride, despite her obvious discomfort at being the center of attention. "My granddaughter, she is special," she said in heavily accented English. "I work 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night, washing dishes in the morning. But Scarlett, she uses every free moment to study. Sometimes I wake up at 3 a.m. and find her reading by the streetlight because we don't always have electricity." The image Rosa painted was devastating in its simplicity. While the people in this room spent thousands on single meals, this brilliant child was studying advanced quantum physics by streetlight because her family couldn't afford to keep the power on. Amir felt something crack inside his chest. He thought of his own son, Khalil, attending the most prestigious private school in Manhattan, with every educational advantage money could buy. Yet Khalil struggled with basic algebra, while this child, this remarkable, extraordinary child, was discussing economic theories that influenced global markets. "What do you want to do with your knowledge, Scarlett?" Dr. Hartwell asked gently. Scarlett's eyes brightened, and for the first time that evening, she looked like the 7-year-old child she was. "I want to help people. Quantum computing could revolutionize medicine. We could discover new treatments for diseases that hurt people like my grandmother's arthritis, and economic models could help governments distribute resources more fairly so that other children don't have to choose between electricity and food." The purity of her ambition, the selfless nature of her dreams, created a stark contrast to the room full of people who had built their wealth on self-interest and competition. Here was a child who had every reason to be bitter about the unfairness of her circumstances, yet her first thought was how to help others. Professor Morrison cleared his throat, visibly emotional. "Scarlett, what you've accomplished it's miraculous. But I have to ask, how do you handle the loneliness? Advanced study can be isolating even for adults." Scarlett considered this question carefully. "Sometimes it is lonely," she admitted. "Other children my age don't understand why I get excited about prime numbers or economic indicators, but Grandma Rosa listens. And the professors I email are very kind. Dr. Zhang from Beijing University sends me puzzles every week, and Professor Okafor from Lagos University shares African economic data that isn't available in standard textbooks." The mention of international correspondence made several guests exchange glances. This child had built an informal network of global academics while living in what was clearly grinding poverty. She had found mentors and intellectual companions across continents while her basic needs, electricity, adequate clothing, reliable meals, remained unmet. Amir's business instincts, honed through decades of identifying value and opportunity, were screaming at him. This wasn't just an intelligent child. This was potentially one of the most brilliant minds of her generation. The combination of raw intellect, demonstrated achievement, and pure motivation was unprecedented in his experience. But more than that, something deeper was stirring within him. The casual cruelty with which they had all dismissed her, the assumptions they had made, the laughter that had greeted her claims. It revealed something ugly about himself that he had never been forced to confront. Dr. Hartwell stood up slowly, her academic composure fully restored. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the crowd, "we are in the presence of an extraordinary mind. This child's achievements would be remarkable for a graduate student, let alone a 7-year-old. Applause began hesitantly from one corner of the room and gradually spread, growing in intensity until it filled the ballroom. But the sound felt different now, not the polite society clapping that had characterized the evening's earlier moments, but something more genuine, more amazed. Scarlett looked around at the applauding crowd with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden reversal in reception. Rosa placed a protective hand on her shoulder, equally bewildered by the transformation in the room's atmosphere. Amir found himself clapping as well, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about his son's elite education, his own privileged upbringing, the vast resources he commanded, and he was comparing all of that to what this child had accomplished with nothing more than determination and a library card. The irony was inescapable. In a room full of people who prided themselves on recognizing talent and opportunity, they had nearly dismissed the most extraordinary person present as nothing more than an amusing distraction. As the applause died down, Amir found himself stepping closer to Scarlett and her grandmother. The child's remarkable composure throughout the evening had impressed him almost as much as her academic achievements. She had faced ridicule with dignity, answered complex questions with precision, and maintained her poise despite being surrounded by people who had initially treated her as nothing more than an unwelcome intrusion. "Scarlett," he said, his voice carrying a gentleness that surprised even him. "May I ask you something?" She nodded, her green eyes meeting his with that same unwavering directness that had first caught his attention. "If you could have anything in the world, anything at all, what would it be?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She glanced at her grandmother, then back at Amir, her brow furrowing in thought. "Anything at all?" "Anything," Amir confirmed. "A laboratory," she said without hesitation. "A real laboratory where I could conduct experiments instead of just reading about them, and a computer powerful enough to run quantum simulations, and—" She paused, her voice growing softer. "Enough money so Grandma Rosa doesn't have to work 2 jobs. She's tired all the time, and her hands hurt from the cleaning chemicals." The simplicity of her requests hit the assembled crowd like a physical force. Here was a child whose intellectual gifts could command millions in research grants, whose potential could reshape entire fields of study, and she was asking for basic equipment and relief for her grandmother's suffering. Mrs. Pemberton, who had earlier been the most vocal in her ridicule, stepped forward hesitantly. "Scarlett, dear, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to laugh at you." "We all were." Scarlett tilted her head slightly, studying the well-dressed woman with curious eyes. "It's okay, ma'am. People usually don't believe me at first. I understand why it sounds impossible." The gracious way she accepted the apology, without bitterness or triumph, only served to highlight the contrast between her character and the behavior of the adults who had mocked her. Several other guests began offering their own apologies, their voices carrying genuine remorse. Dr. Hartwell approached Amir with purposeful steps. "Mr. Al-Rashid, this child represents an opportunity that may never come again. Her intellect is extraordinary. But more than that, her character is remarkable. She could benefit from proper resources and guidance." Amir nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities. "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "Columbia would be honored to provide her with advanced coursework, access to our laboratories, and mentorship from our faculty. But she would need support, financial support for her family, proper housing, healthcare. The practical considerations are significant." As Dr. Hartwell spoke, Amir found himself studying Rosa. The elderly woman's face bore the marks of hard labor and worry, but her eyes shone with fierce pride as she watched her granddaughter navigate this surreal situation. The love between them was evident in every protective gesture, every encouraging nod. "Mrs. Amir began, realizing he didn't know Rosa's surname. "Williams," Rosa supplied quietly. "Rosa Williams. Mrs. Williams. How long have you been caring for Scarlett?" Rosa's expression grew sad. "Since she was 3. My daughter, Scarlett's mother, she died in car accident. Father was never in picture. It's just me and Scarlett now." The revelation added another layer to the story. This brilliant child was an orphan, being raised by a grandmother who was sacrificing her health and well-being to provide for her. The weight of responsibility Rosa carried became even more apparent. "And you've supported her education all this time?" Professor Morrison asked. "I do what I can," Rosa replied simply. "Library is free. Internet at McDonald's is free sometimes. Scarlett, she make it work. She always make it work." Scarlett reached up and took her grandmother's weathered hand in her small one. "Grandma Rosa believes in me, even when I don't understand something right away. She says smart isn't about knowing everything. It's about never stopping to learn." The wisdom in this simple statement, delivered by a 7-year-old, resonated through the ballroom. These were people who had attended the finest universities, who commanded vast resources and influence, yet few could match the profound understanding of education's true purpose that this child and her grandmother shared. Amir felt a fundamental shift occurring within him. For years, He had measured worth by financial success, social status, and material acquisition. He had judged people by their appearance, their connections, their ability to contribute to his business interests. But this evening had shattered those superficial metrics. "Scarlett," he said, making a decision that felt both sudden and inevitable, "I'd like to make you an offer." The crowd leaned in, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I want to establish a fund, no more than that. I want to create an opportunity for you to reach your full potential. Full scholarships, the best educational resources available, a laboratory of your own, and enough support to ensure your grandmother never has to worry about basic necessities again." Gasps echoed through the crowd. This wasn't just charitable giving, this was life-changing intervention. Scarlett's eyes widened, and for the first time that evening, she looked overwhelmed. "Sir, that's very generous, but why would you do that for us?" The question forced Amir to confront his motivations. Why was he making this offer? Was it guilt over his initial reaction? Was it a business instinct recognizing exceptional talent? Or was it something deeper, a recognition that he had encountered something rare and precious that deserved to be nurtured? "Because tonight you taught me something important," he said honestly. "You showed me that I've been looking at the world with the wrong eyes. Intelligence, talent, character, these things aren't distributed based on wealth or social status. They can emerge anywhere, in anyone. And when we encounter something as extraordinary as what you possess, we have a responsibility to help it flourish." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Al-Rashid, if I may, I'd like to extend an invitation as well. Yale's linguistics department would be honored to work with Scarlett. Her understanding of language families could contribute to research that we're currently conducting." Soon, other professors were adding their voices. Professor Morrison mentioned Harvard's economic research programs. Dr. Hartwell discussed Columbia's quantum computing initiatives. What had begun as a single offer was becoming a consortium of academic support. But through it all, Scarlett remained focused on the most important person in her life. "Can Grandma Rosa come with me? I won't go anywhere without her." "Of course," Amir assured her. "This offer includes your grandmother. She'll have the medical care she needs for her arthritis, a comfortable home, and the security of knowing that her sacrifices for your education have been recognized and honored." Rosa began to cry quietly, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation in their prospects. Scarlett wrapped her small arms around her grandmother, whispering words of comfort in what sounded like Spanish. "You speak Spanish too?" Dr. Chen asked with professional interest. 12 languages, Scarlett replied matter-of-factly. "Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, French, Russian, Portuguese, Japanese, Hindi, Swahili, German, Italian, and English. I'm working on Korean now." But the honorific system is quite complex. The casual mention of her polyglot abilities drew fresh amazement from the crowd. This child continued to reveal new depths of knowledge and capability with each passing moment. Amir found himself thinking about his own life differently. He had always believed that his success was a result of his own merit, his intelligence, his hard work. But meeting Scarlett had forced him to acknowledge the role of privilege in his achievements. He had been born into wealth, educated at elite institutions, given every possible advantage. What might he have become if he had started with nothing but raw talent and determination, as Scarlett had? The question was both humbling and inspiring. It made him realize that true greatness wasn't about starting with advantages. It was about what you did with whatever circumstances you found yourself in. And by that measure, this 7-year-old girl had already achieved more than most people accomplished in a lifetime. The weeks following that transformative evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel passed in a whirlwind of change that neither Scarlett nor Rosa could have imagined. Amir had moved swiftly to establish what he called the Scarlett Williams Educational Foundation, but his involvement went far beyond simple financial support. He found himself personally invested in every detail of their transition from poverty to opportunity. The first order of business had been housing. Amir arranged for Scarlett and Rosa to move into a comfortable apartment in the Upper West Side, close to Columbia University, and within walking distance of the resources Scarlett would need. The apartment was modest by his standards: 2 bedrooms, a small office space that could serve as a study area, and a kitchen where Rosa could prepare the traditional Puerto Rican meals that Scarlett loved. But what moved Amir most was witnessing their adjustment to sudden security. On his first visit to their new home, he found Rosa standing in the kitchen, simply turning the light switch on and off repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Williams?" he asked gently. "The lights," she whispered. "They stay on, all day, all night. Scarlett can read whenever she wants." The profound gratitude in her voice for something as basic as reliable electricity struck Amir with renewed force. He had never given a moment's thought to turning on a light switch. The casual assumptions of privilege were being dismantled piece by piece through his interactions with this extraordinary family. Scarlett's adaptation to her new circumstances revealed the depth of her character in ways that continued to surprise everyone around her. Rather than becoming overwhelmed by suddenly having access to resources she had only dreamed of, she approached each new opportunity with methodical precision and genuine humility. Dr. Hartwell had arranged for Scarlett to audit several graduate-level courses at Columbia, and the professors were astounded by her contributions to classroom discussions. In advanced quantum mechanics, she posed questions that challenged established assumptions. In international economic policy, she offered insights drawn from her correspondence with economists around the world. But perhaps most remarkably, she never allowed her academic pursuits to overshadow her relationship with Rosa. Every evening, no matter how complex the research she was engaged in, Scarlett would set aside time to help her grandmother with English lessons, to share stories about her day, or simply to sit together and watch Rosa's favorite telenovelas. Amir found himself visiting them more frequently than he had initially planned. What began as oversight of a charitable project had evolved into something more personal. He was fascinated by the dynamics of their small family unit, the way Rosa's unconditional love had created the foundation for Scarlett's intellectual confidence, the way Scarlett's achievements brought purpose and joy to Rosa's difficult life. During one such visit, he found Scarlett working on a tablet computer he had provided, her screen filled with complex equations. But she wasn't alone. Rosa sat beside her, knitting and occasionally asking questions about what her granddaughter was doing. "I'm working on a theorem about quantum entanglement applications in secure communications," Scarlett explained to Rosa, her voice patient and loving. "It's like, remember how you taught me to knit? When you connect two pieces of yarn, they stay connected even when you pull them apart. Quantum particles can be connected like that too." Rosa nodded seriously, though Amir suspected she understood very little of the science involved. What she understood perfectly was that her granddaughter was happy, engaged, and pursuing her dreams. That was enough. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Scarlett noticed his arrival. "I wanted to thank you for the laboratory access at Columbia. Professor Chen arranged for me to use the linguistics lab, and I've been working on a project comparing grammatical evolution patterns across the 12 languages I speak." Amir sat down across from them, struck once again by the casual way Scarlett referenced achievements that would be remarkable for a doctoral candidate. "What have you discovered?" "Fascinating correlations between economic trade patterns and grammatical simplification," she replied, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Languages that develop in regions with extensive trade networks tend to lose complex case systems more rapidly. It suggests that economic necessity drives linguistic evolution in predictable ways." The observation was brilliant in its simplicity and far-reaching in its implications. Amir found himself wondering what other connections this remarkable mind might uncover when given proper resources and encouragement. But it was what happened next that truly captured his attention. Scarlett closed her tablet and turned to Rosa with complete focus. "Abuela, tell me about the story of the princess and the stars," she requested in Spanish. Rosa's weathered face broke into a smile, and she began recounting a fairy tale she had obviously told many times before. Scarlett listened with the same intense concentration she brought to quantum physics, occasionally asking questions or adding embellishments to the familiar story. The scene encapsulated something profound about Scarlett's character. Despite her extraordinary intellectual gifts, she never lost sight of what truly mattered: the people she loved, the relationships that sustained her, the simple joys of childhood imagination. Dr. Hartwell arrived while Rosa was finishing her story, carrying a folder thick with documentation. "Amir, we need to discuss Scarlett's academic trajectory. The faculty committee has reviewed her progress, and frankly, we're in uncharted territory." They moved to the small office area while Scarlett and Rosa continued their storytelling in the living room. Dr. Hartwell spread out test results, faculty evaluations, and assessment reports across the desk, Her performance is unprecedented, Dr. Hartwell began. She's not just auditing these courses, she's contributing original insights that are advancing our research. Professor Mitchell in the physics department wants to collaborate with her on his quantum computing project. Dr. Rodriguez in economics is incorporating her trade pattern analysis into his next paper. Amir studied the documents, seeing validation for what he had intuitively understood that first evening. What are you recommending? Acceleration, but carefully managed. We could have her complete undergraduate equivalencies within 2 years, but I'm concerned about the social implications. She's still a 7-year-old child, regardless of her intellectual capabilities. It was a valid concern that had been weighing on Amir's mind as well. How do you nurture extraordinary intelligence while preserving childhood? How do you challenge a mind that operates at graduate level while ensuring emotional and social development? What does Scarlett want? He asked. That's the remarkable thing, Dr. Hartwell replied. She wants balance. She's asked if she can continue her advanced studies while also participating in age-appropriate activities. She wants to join the children's choir at the local community center. She's expressed interest in learning to play piano. She even asked if there were other children her age who might be interested in science clubs. The wisdom in Scarlett's approach to her own development was striking. Despite having intellectual capabilities that could fast-track her into any academic program, she recognized the importance of maintaining connections to childhood experiences. A knock at the apartment door interrupted their discussion. Amir opened it to find a delivery person, holding an enormous bouquet of roses. Not the simple flowers Scarlett had been selling that first evening, but an elaborate arrangement that must have cost hundreds of dollars. The card read, "For the most brilliant mind I've ever encountered, from your admiring colleagues in the Columbia Physics Department." But as Amir carried the flowers into the living room, he noticed something that made him pause. Scarlett looked at the expensive arrangement with appreciation, but her attention was drawn to something else entirely. On the windowsill sat a small glass vase containing a single wilted rose, one of the original flowers from that first evening. "You kept it," he observed. Scarlett nodded. "It reminds me that sometimes the most important things come in simple packages. That rose brought us together, didn't it? If we hadn't been trying to sell flowers that night, none of this would have happened." The profundity of her observation, the way she could find meaning and gratitude in circumstances that had initially seemed unfortunate, reinforced Amir's growing conviction that Scarlett's greatest gift wasn't her intelligence, it was her character. Rosa appeared beside them, having finished cleaning up their evening tea. "Scarlett always sees the good in everything," she said quietly. "Even when we had nothing, she would find reasons to be grateful." "What were you grateful for then?" Amir asked Scarlett curiously. "Books at the library, kind librarians, professors who answered my emails even though they'd never met me, Grandma Rosa's stories, the warmth of McDonald's when it was cold outside." She paused thoughtfully. "I guess I learned that happiness doesn't come from having everything you want. It comes from appreciating what you have and believing that tomorrow might bring new possibilities." The 8-year-old had just articulated a philosophy of life that most adults spent decades trying to understand. Amir found himself reflecting on his own relationship with gratitude, his assumptions about what constituted a successful life, his understanding of what truly mattered. 6 months had passed since that life-changing evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, and Amir found his entire worldview continuing to evolve through his relationship with Scarlett and Rosa. What had begun as a charitable gesture had become something much deeper, a friendship that challenged his assumptions about success, intelligence, and the meaning of a life well lived. The transformation wasn't limited to their circumstances. Amir noticed changes in himself that surprised him. He found himself questioning business decisions through a new lens. What impact would this have on employees and their families? Was profit maximization the only measure of success? Could his vast resources be deployed to create opportunities for others the way they had for Scarlett? These questions crystallized one afternoon when Scarlett made an unexpected request. "Mr. Al-Rashid," she said during one of his weekly visits, "I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to ask your advice." She led him to her small office, where she had covered one entire wall with a complex diagram that looked like a combination of economic flowcharts, scientific equations, and social impact assessments. "I've been corresponding with Dr. Amara in Somalia about educational access in refugee camps, and Professor Okafor in Nigeria about economic development in rural communities, And Dr. Zhang about technology infrastructure in remote areas, she began, pointing to different sections of her diagram. And I think I've identified a way to create sustainable educational opportunities for children in poverty around the world. Amir studied the diagram, recognizing the sophisticated thinking behind its organization. Tell me more. Mobile learning laboratories, Scarlett explained enthusiastically. Solar-powered units that can be transported to any location, equipped with satellite internet, basic laboratory equipment, and AI-assisted learning platforms. They could provide advanced education to children who would otherwise never have access to such resources. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity and revolutionary in its potential impact. But what struck Amir most was the motivation behind it. Why is this important to you, Scarlett? She looked at him with those same clear eyes that had first captivated him months earlier. Because there are other children like me out there, children who are brilliant but hidden by poverty, children whose grandmothers are working multiple jobs just to provide basic needs. I was lucky. I had a library, kind librarians, and professors willing to correspond with a curious child. But what about children in places without libraries, without internet access, without advocates? The scope of her vision was breathtaking, but more than that, it reflected a maturity and social consciousness that humbled him. Here was an 8-year-old child thinking about global educational equity, while most adults her age were focused on playground dynamics. This would require significant investment, Amir pointed out. Yes, Scarlett agreed. I've calculated approximately $15 million for the initial pilot program, 5 mobile units, operating expenses for 2 years, and partnerships with local organizations in target regions. She had done her homework, analyzing costs with the same precision she brought to quantum physics problems. But Amir was more interested in understanding her deeper motivations. Scarlett, you could have asked for anything for yourself: advanced equipment, prestigious opportunities, resources to accelerate your own research. Instead, you're thinking about other children. Why? She considered his question carefully, a habit he had come to appreciate about her thoughtful nature. Because I remember what it felt like to be invisible, she said quietly. When we were selling flowers, people looked right through us. They saw our circumstances, not our possibilities. They made assumptions about what we could offer based on what we appeared to need. The observation cut deeply because Amir recognized its accuracy. He had been guilty of exactly that kind of superficial judgment. But more than that, Scarlett continued, I learned something important from watching Grandma Rosa all these years. She could have been bitter about our situation. She could have focused on everything we didn't have. Instead, she always looked for ways to help others, even when we had almost nothing ourselves. As if summoned by their conversation, Rosa appeared with a tray of café con leche and homemade pastels, setting them down with the gracious hospitality that characterized all her interactions. ¿De qué hablan?" she asked in Spanish. "About helping other children get education," Scarlett replied in English, unconsciously including Amir in their conversation. Rosa nodded approvingly. "Education is the only inheritance I can give, Scarlett," she said to Amir. "But if she uses it to help others, then my sacrifices mean something bigger." The wisdom in Rosa's perspective reinforced something Amir was beginning to understand. True wealth wasn't measured in assets or income, but in the positive impact one could have on others' lives. "I'd like to fund your mobile laboratory project," he said suddenly. Scarlett's eyes widened with excitement, but her response surprised him. "Can we visit one of the target locations first? I want to understand the specific needs and challenges before we implement anything. Book knowledge is powerful, but real understanding requires direct experience." Her insistence on field research before implementation demonstrated the kind of practical wisdom that most development organizations took years to learn. She wanted to ensure that solutions were designed with input from the communities they were meant to serve. "Where would you like to start?" Amir asked. "Guatemala," she replied without hesitation. "Dr. Morales from the Universidad de San Carlos has been corresponding with me about educational challenges in rural communities. She's identified several villages that could benefit from mobile educational resources." The conversation was interrupted by Amir's phone buzzing with an urgent message from his assistant. "Board meeting crisis. Hostile takeover attempt. Immediate attention required." The familiar demands of his business empire were calling, but as he looked at the eager faces of Scarlett and Rosa, As he considered the global impact potential of an 8-year-old's vision for educational equity, he made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. He typed a reply to his assistant, "Handle it. I'm working on something more important." The look of surprise on Scarlett's face told him she understood the significance of his choice. For the first time in his adult life, he was prioritizing something other than immediate business interests. "Mr. Al-Rashid," she said seriously, "are you sure your business is important too?" "Yes, it is," he agreed. "But I'm learning that there are different kinds of importance. Building wealth is one thing, building a better world is something else entirely." Rosa began to cry quietly, overwhelmed by the recognition that her granddaughter's dreams were not only being heard, but actively supported. Scarlett moved to comfort her, speaking softly in Spanish and English about how their dreams were becoming reality. Watching them together, Amir reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them into his life. A chance encounter, a moment of desperation, a child's bold claim that had initially provoked laughter. These seemingly random circumstances had led to the most meaningful relationship he had ever experienced. His phone buzzed again with increasingly urgent messages from his business team. Stock prices, market fluctuations, competitive pressures. The concerns that had once consumed his attention seemed distant and somehow smaller when measured against the conversations happening in this modest apartment. "Scarlett," he said, "I want you to know that meeting you has changed how I think about everything. My business, my priorities, my understanding of what makes a life meaningful." She tilted her head with that characteristic expression of thoughtful consideration. "Change can be uncomfortable," she observed, "but it's usually how we become better versions of ourselves." The profound simplicity of her insight encapsulated what he had been experiencing. The discomfort he felt questioning long-held assumptions, the challenge of redefining success, the complexity of balancing business obligations with social responsibility, all of it was part of becoming a better version of himself. "I have a proposal," he said. "Instead of just funding your mobile laboratory project, what if we created something bigger? A foundation dedicated to identifying and supporting brilliant children in poverty around the world. We could scale your vision, create a systematic approach to finding hidden potential and providing opportunities." Scarlett's expression grew serious as she considered the implications. "That would be amazing," she said slowly, "but we'd need to be very careful about how we do it. We can't just impose solutions from the outside. We need to work with local communities, understand their specific needs and cultural contexts." Her caution impressed him even more than her enthusiasm. She was thinking like a seasoned development professional while maintaining the idealism and energy of childhood. "Would you be willing to help design and guide such a foundation?" he asked. "Only if Grandma Rosa can be part of it too," Scarlett replied immediately. "She understands things about resilience and hope that can't be learned from books." Rosa looked up from her knitting, not fully understanding the English conversation, but recognizing that important decisions were being made. Scarlett explained the proposal in rapid Spanish, and Rosa's face lit up with pride and excitement. As the three of them sat in that modest apartment, planning how to change the world for children like Scarlett, Amir realized that his life had found a purpose he had never imagined. The wealth he had accumulated, the influence he had built, the resources he commanded, suddenly they all had meaning beyond personal achievement. 1 year after their first meeting, Amir stood in the bustling courtyard of a small school in the mountains of Guatemala, watching Scarlett, now 8 years old, engage with local children in rapid Spanish while Rosa helped teachers organize learning materials. The first pilot mobile laboratory had arrived 3 days earlier, and the transformation in the community was already remarkable. The mobile unit itself was an engineering marvel that had exceeded even Scarlett's ambitious specifications. Solar panels provided reliable power, satellite connectivity ensured internet access, and the interior was equipped with everything from basic scientific instruments to advanced computing equipment. But more importantly, it had been designed based on months of collaboration with local educators and community leaders. "Mira, así funciona," Scarlett explained to a group of fascinated children gathered around a microscope, her Spanish now fluent enough to include technical concepts. She was showing them how to examine plant cells, but Amir could see that she was learning as much as she was teaching. The journey to this moment had been transformative for all of them. The initial planning phase had required Amir to completely restructure his approach to business and philanthropy. Instead of the top-down decision-making that characterized his corporate operations, the foundation had adopted Scarlett's insistence on community consultation and collaborative design. Dr. Morales, the Guatemalan educator who had been corresponding with Scarlett, approached Amir with obvious excitement. "Mr. Al-Rashid, what your foundation has created here, it's revolutionary. Not just the technology, but the methodology." Scarlett insisted that we train local teachers to become the primary instructors. She said the mobile laboratory should enhance local expertise, not replace it. The wisdom behind this approach was becoming evident as Amir watched the interactions around him. The visiting technology was impressive, but what made it truly powerful was how seamlessly it integrated with existing educational structures and cultural values. "Senor Al-Rashid," a small voice called out in careful English. He turned to see Maria, a 10-year-old girl whose mathematical abilities had caught Scarlett's attention on their first day. She was holding a notebook filled with complex calculations. "Scarlett showed me how to use logarithms to predict population growth patterns in our village," Maria explained proudly. "I want to study how we can improve agricultural productivity to support more families." The conversation was happening in basic English, but the concepts Maria was grappling with were sophisticated enough to challenge university students. Watching her explain her analysis to Amir, he couldn't help but think about how different her life trajectory might be thanks to this opportunity. But it was what happened next that truly captured the essence of what they were trying to achieve. Instead of keeping her newfound knowledge to herself, Maria immediately began teaching the logarithmic concepts to younger children, adapting the complexity to match their understanding levels. "She's doing exactly what Scarlett did," Rosa observed, appearing beside Amir with her characteristic quiet wisdom. On learning something new and immediately thinking about how to share it, the pattern was emerging throughout the community. Children who gained access to advanced concepts through the mobile laboratory were spontaneously becoming teachers and mentors for others. Knowledge was spreading organically, creating a multiplying effect that far exceeded what any traditional educational intervention could achieve. Scarlett approached them with dirt on her shoes and excitement in her eyes. "Mr. Al-Rashid, we need to modify the curriculum modules. The children here are asking questions I hadn't anticipated. They want to understand the connection between mathematical patterns and traditional weaving techniques, how chemical principles relate to their families, agricultural practices." Her observation highlighted something crucial about their approach. Rather than imposing a standardized curriculum, they were discovering that the most powerful learning happened when advanced concepts connected directly to students' lived experiences and cultural knowledge. "What are you proposing?" Amir asked. "Localized adaptations for each mobile laboratory," Scarlett replied. "The core mathematical and scientific principles remain the same, but the applications and examples should reflect the specific environment and culture of each community." The sophistication of her thinking continued to amaze him. She was developing insights about educational methodology that could revolutionize how advanced learning was delivered in underserved communities worldwide. That evening, as they sat in the modest guest house where they were staying, Amir found himself reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed. 12 months earlier, his biggest concerns had been quarterly profit margins and market share expansion. Now he was coordinating with UNESCO representatives about scaling educational innovations across Central America. "Are you having second thoughts?" Scarlett asked, noticing his contemplative mood. The question surprised him. "About what?" "About changing your whole life because of a chance meeting with a poor girl selling flowers," she said with characteristic directness. Amir considered the question seriously. He had indeed changed his whole life. The Al-Rashid Foundation for Global Educational Equity now commanded more of his attention than his original business empire. His company's board had initially resisted his new priorities, but the positive publicity and employee engagement generated by their social impact initiatives had ultimately strengthened the corporation's market position. "No second thoughts," he said firmly, "but I am curious about something. How did you know, that first night at the hotel, that I would respond the way I did?" Scarlett tilted her head, considering his question. "I didn't know you would respond at all, but I learned something from watching Grandma Rosa all those years. She taught me that you plant seeds of possibility wherever you go, without knowing which ones will grow. Most people looked right through us when we sold flowers, but we kept trying because eventually someone would see us. The metaphor was profound in its simplicity. Scarlett had been planting seeds of possibility her entire short life, in every email to professors, every library study session, every demonstration of knowledge in unlikely circumstances. The hotel encounter hadn't been a calculated strategy. It had been another seed, planted with hope but without expectations. Rosa joined them on the small porch, bringing steaming cups of local coffee. "Tomorrow we visit the next village," she said in English that was much improved from a year ago. More children to meet. The next village was a 6-hour journey by jeep along mountain roads that tested even their robust vehicle. But when they arrived, Amir understood why Scarlett had insisted on making the trip. The community was even more remote than the first, with limited access to basic educational resources, let alone advanced learning opportunities. Yet within an hour of setting up the mobile laboratory, they were surrounded by curious children, whose questions demonstrated the same hunger for knowledge that characterized brilliant minds everywhere. "Os, why do leaves change color in different seasons?" asked a 12-year-old boy named Carlos. "How do birds know which direction to fly when they migrate?" wondered 8-year-old Isabella. "Can mathematics help us predict when it will rain?" inquired 10-year-old Jose. Each question revealed minds already engaged with complex observations about the natural world, needing only the tools and frameworks to transform curiosity into understanding. As Scarlett began demonstrating basic chemistry principles using local plants and minerals, Amir found himself in conversation with the village's elderly leader, Don Ricardo, who had been observing the proceedings with keen interest. "This is different from other programs that have come here," Don Ricardo observed in Spanish, which Amir now understood well enough to follow. "Usually, outsiders come to teach us what they think we should know. This girl, she's learning from our children while she teaches them." The distinction was crucial. Scarlett's approach was fundamentally reciprocal. She brought advanced scientific and mathematical frameworks, but she was equally interested in understanding indigenous knowledge systems, traditional ecological practices, and local problem-solving methods. "What has she learned from you?" Amir asked. Don Ricardo smiled. "Yesterday, she spent 2 hours with our weaver, studying the mathematical patterns in traditional textiles. She said the geometric principles could inform new approaches to engineering problems. She treats our knowledge as valuable, not primitive." This reciprocal respect was transforming how the community engaged with the educational opportunities being offered. Instead of feeling like passive recipients of outside expertise, they were active partners in a knowledge exchange that honored both traditional wisdom and modern scientific understanding. By the end of their week in the second village, they had identified 3 more children with exceptional potential, established partnerships with local teachers for ongoing support, and developed modifications to the mobile laboratory curriculum that reflected local environmental and cultural factors. But perhaps most significantly, they had validated the scalability of their model. The success wasn't dependent on Scarlett's unique presence. The combination of advanced resources, community partnership, and reciprocal learning could be replicated by trained teams in other locations. 2 years had passed since that transformative evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, and Amir found himself standing before the United Nations General Assembly, preparing to present the Al Rashid Foundation's groundbreaking approach to global educational equity. Beside him sat Scarlett, now 9 years old, who had been invited to address the international community about the perspective of children in developing educational solutions. The journey to this moment had been extraordinary. What had begun with a single mobile laboratory in Guatemala had expanded to 47 units operating across 23 countries. The foundation had identified over 300 children with exceptional potential, established partnerships with local universities in 15 nations, and created a network of community-based educational centers that served over 12,000 students. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the human transformation that Amir had witnessed, both in the communities they served and in himself. "Mr. Al-Rashid," the Secretary General's aide approached them in the preparation room. "The assembly is ready for your presentation." As they walked toward the iconic podium, Amir reflected on how surreal this moment would have seemed 2 years earlier. He had addressed corporate boards, investor meetings, and industry conferences, but speaking about education and social equity to world leaders represented a fundamental shift in his identity and purpose. "Distinguished delegates," he began, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from deep conviction. "2 years ago, I encountered a 7-year-old girl who challenged everything I thought I knew about intelligence, potential, and social responsibility. Today, I want to share what that encounter has taught us about reimagining educational opportunity in the 21st century." He presented the Foundation's methodology, highlighting the emphasis on community partnership, reciprocal learning, and locally adapted curricula. But as he spoke, he found himself thinking less about the technical achievements and more about the individual stories. Children like Maria in Guatemala, who was now designing agricultural optimization models, Carlos in Peru, who had developed water purification systems for his village, and Amara in Kenya, who was creating educational content in 3 local languages. However, he continued, the most important insights about our work come not from the adults who have implemented it, but from the young people who have experienced it. I'd like to introduce someone who has been central to developing our approach, Scarlett Williams. As Scarlett approached the podium, Amir felt a surge of pride mixed with amazement. The same child who had been dismissed and ridiculed by wealthy socialites was now preparing to address the world's most powerful leaders about global educational policy. She adjusted the microphone with practiced ease, her composure remarkable for someone who had just turned 9 years old. "Honorable delegates," she began, her clear voice carrying throughout the assembly hall, "I want to tell you about something I learned from my grandmother, Rosa Williams, who is watching from the gallery today." Scarlett paused to gesture toward Rosa, who was seated in the visitors section wearing her best dress and beaming with pride. "My grandmother taught me that every child is born with seeds of brilliance, but those seeds can only grow in the right conditions. For too long, we've assumed that those conditions require wealth, advanced infrastructure, or urban environments. Our work has proven that assumption wrong." Her presentation was remarkable, not just for its content, but for how she connected complex policy recommendations to human stories and universal values. She spoke about children in remote villages who were now collaborating with urban students on scientific research projects, about traditional knowledge systems being integrated with modern educational frameworks, about communities that had become centers of innovation rather than recipients of aid. "The children I've met in 23 countries have taught me that brilliance isn't distributed according to geography or economic status," she continued. "A child in rural Guatemala can contribute as much to our understanding of sustainable agriculture as a student at Harvard Business School. A young person in a Kenyan village can develop insights about renewable energy that rival those of Silicon Valley engineers." As she spoke, Amir noticed delegates leaning forward, taking notes, engaging with her words in ways that surprised him. Here was a 9-year-old commanding the attention of world leaders, not through novelty or sentiment, but through the power of her ideas and the authenticity of her experience. "But I also want to share what I've learned about the responsibility that comes with opportunity," Scarlett said, her tone growing more serious. 2 years ago, Mr. Al-Rashid and his foundation gave my grandmother and me chances we had only dreamed of. But the real gift wasn't the resources. It was the recognition that our potential mattered, that our dreams were worth investing in." She paused, looking directly at the assembled delegates. "Every child deserves that recognition. Every young person should have the opportunity to discover and develop their unique gifts. This isn't just about education, it's about justice, about creating a world where brilliance can flourish regardless of the circumstances into which someone is born." The applause that followed was sustained and genuine, reflecting not just diplomatic courtesy, but real engagement with her message. Amir watched as delegates from different nations approached each other during the break, discussing collaboration possibilities and resource sharing. After the presentation, they were surrounded by representatives from various countries, international organizations, and NGOs, wanting to learn more about replicating their model. But what struck Amir most was overhearing a conversation between 2 education ministers about how Scarlett's perspective had challenged their assumptions about youth engagement in policy development. "She speaks with more clarity about educational philosophy than most experts," one minister observed. "Because she's lived it from both sides," the other replied. "She understands what it means to be overlooked and what it feels like to be empowered." That evening, At a reception hosted by UNICEF, Amir found himself in conversation with Dr. Amara Okafor, the Nigerian economist who had been corresponding with Scarlett since she was 7 years old. Mr. Al-Rashid, Dr. Okafor said, "I wanted to thank you for supporting Scarlett's work, but I also wanted to share something with you. In our correspondence over the past 2 years, she has contributed to 3 papers I've published on economic development in sub-Saharan Africa. Her insights about the relationship between educational access and economic mobility have influenced policy recommendations at the highest levels." The revelation reinforced something Amir had been gradually understanding. Scarlett's impact extended far beyond the Foundation's direct programs. Her ideas, distributed through her network of academic correspondents, were influencing research and policy development around the world. "What's remarkable," Dr. Okafor continued, "is how she maintains perspective. Despite her achievements, she never loses sight of her primary mission, creating opportunities for other children like herself." As if summoned by their conversation, Scarlett appeared with Rosa, both of them glowing from the day's success. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Scarlett said excitedly, "the delegation from Bangladesh wants to partner with us on establishing mobile laboratories in their rural regions, and the representative from UNESCO is interested in incorporating our community partnership model into their global education initiatives." Her enthusiasm was infectious, but Amir was equally struck by how she included Rosa in sharing the day's achievements. Despite the global stage and international recognition, Scarlett never forgot that her grandmother's support and sacrifice had made everything possible. "I'm proud of you," he told her simply. Both of you." "We're proud of you too," Scarlett replied with characteristic directness. "You could have just written a check and walked away. Instead, you chose to learn and change and become part of something bigger than yourself." Her observation forced Amir to reflect on his own transformation. 2 years ago, he had measured success solely in financial terms. Today, he found meaning in very different metrics: the number of children who had gained access to advanced education, the communities that had been empowered to become centers of learning, the partnerships that had bridged traditional divides between developed and developing regions. But more than that, he had discovered something about himself that he had never known existed: a capacity for purposeful leadership that went beyond profit maximization. The skills that had made him successful in business, strategic thinking, resource mobilization, relationship building, had proven equally effective when applied to social impact. As they stood together in the reception hall, surrounded by the world's leading voices in education and development, Amir realized that their journey was just beginning. The Foundation's work had gained momentum and recognition, but the underlying challenge, ensuring that every brilliant child had the opportunity to develop their potential, remained enormous. "What's next?" he asked Scarlett. She looked thoughtful, an expression he had come to associate with her most ambitious ideas. "I want to create a global network where children can collaborate directly with each other on solving real-world problems. Imagine a 10-year-old in rural India working with an 8-year-old in urban Brazil and a 12-year-old in a refugee camp to develop solutions for climate change adaptation." The vision was breathtaking in its scope and revolutionary in its implications. She was imagining a world where age, geography, and economic circumstances became irrelevant barriers to collaboration and innovation. That would require unprecedented coordination and technology infrastructure, Amir pointed out. Scarlett smiled with the same confidence she had shown that first evening at the hotel. "Good thing we know someone with experience in building complex global networks." 5 years after that transformative evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, Amir stood once again in the same ballroom where his life had been forever changed. But this time, he wasn't there as a guest. He was hosting the 5th Annual Global Youth Innovation Summit, and the room was filled with brilliant children from around the world. Scarlett, now 12 years old, was preparing to announce the results of the most ambitious project the Foundation had ever undertaken, a global collaborative initiative where children from 57 countries had worked together to develop solutions for climate change, poverty, and educational inequality. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the crowd that included world leaders, Nobel laureates, and corporate executives, "I want to introduce you to the future." As she spoke, Holographic displays around the room showed real-time presentations from children in remote villages, urban centers, and refugee camps. A 13-year-old from Bangladesh was demonstrating a water purification system developed in collaboration with an 11-year-old from Kenya and a 9-year-old from Peru. Children from Syria, Somalia, and Guatemala were presenting joint research on sustainable agriculture that had already been implemented in their communities. But what moved Amir most was seeing Rosa in the front row, her eyes shining with tears of pride as she watched her granddaughter facilitate this unprecedented global collaboration. The same grandmother who had worked 2 jobs to provide basic necessities was now witnessing her granddaughter coordinate the voices of the world's most promising young minds. 5 years ago, Scarlett continued, many people in this very room laughed when I claimed to have 4 doctorates. They couldn't imagine that a poor child selling flowers could possess advanced knowledge or contribute meaningful insights to complex problems. A ripple of uncomfortable recognition passed through the audience. Several of the original guests from that evening were present, including Mrs. Pemberton, who had been one of the loudest voices of ridicule. But that laughter taught me something important, Scarlett said, her voice gaining strength. It taught me that the world's biggest problems aren't technological or economic. They're problems of imagination. We fail to solve global challenges because we can't imagine that solutions might come from unexpected places, from overlooked voices, from children who see possibilities that adults have forgotten how to perceive. She gestured toward the holographic displays showing children from around the world presenting their innovations. These young people haven't just developed remarkable solutions. They've proven that brilliance exists everywhere, waiting to be recognized and nurtured. As if on cue, the displays shifted to show the real-world impact of the children's collaborations. Villages with clean water systems, refugee camps with solar-powered educational centers, urban communities with vertical gardens, remote regions connected to global knowledge networks. Mr. Al-Rashid, Scarlett turned to address him directly. You once told me that meeting me changed how you think about everything. I want you to know that meeting you taught me something equally important, that transformation is always possible, that people can choose to become better versions of themselves, that wealth and power can be forces for justice and opportunity. Amir felt his throat tighten with emotion. The child who had been dismissed as a fantasy was now commanding the respect of the world's most powerful people. But more than that, she was using her platform to advocate for other children who remained invisible and overlooked. Today, we announced the launch of the Global Children's Innovation Network, Scarlett declared, a platform that will connect brilliant young minds from every corner of the world, providing them with resources, mentorship, and the recognition that their ideas matter. The announcement was met with thunderous applause, but Amir was focused on something else entirely. In the back of the room, he noticed hotel staff, janitors, servers, kitchen workers, who had paused in their duties to listen to Scarlett's presentation. Their faces showed the same mixture of amazement and hope that he had first seen in Rosa's eyes. It was in that moment that Amir fully understood the true significance of what they had accomplished. They hadn't just identified and nurtured one brilliant child. They had created a model for recognizing human potential wherever it existed, regardless of circumstances or appearances. The laughter that had once greeted Scarlett's claims had been replaced by recognition, respect, and commitment to ensuring that no child's brilliance would ever again be dismissed because of poverty or prejudice. As the summit concluded, and delegates from around the world committed to supporting the Global Children's Innovation Network, Amir found himself alone with Scarlett and Rosa in the same corner of the ballroom where their journey had begun 5 years earlier. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met that night?" he asked Scarlett. She considered the question with the same thoughtfulness that characterized all her responses. "I think we would have found each other eventually. When you plant enough seeds of possibility, some of them always find the right soil to grow." Rosa, now in her 70s but healthier and more vibrant than she had been years earlier, smiled at her granddaughter's wisdom. "Scarlett always says everything happens for a reason, but we have to be ready to recognize the reasons when they appear." Amir reflected on how profoundly true that observation was. 5 years ago, he had been so focused on his narrow definition of success that he had almost missed the most important encounter of his life. It had taken a child's bold claim and unwavering dignity to open his eyes to possibilities he had never imagined. The Al-Rashid Foundation for Global Educational Equity now operated in 68 countries, had identified and supported over 1,500 exceptional children, and had influenced educational policy at the highest levels of international governance. But beyond the numbers and achievements, it had proven something fundamental about human nature, that brilliance and potential exist everywhere, waiting only for recognition and opportunity. "What's your next impossible dream?" Amir asked Scarlett, using a phrase that had become their private joke. Her eyes lit up with the same spark of ambitious vision that had first captivated him. "I want to create a world where no child's potential is ever overlooked because of circumstances beyond their control, where curiosity is valued more than conformity, where questions matter more than assumptions, where every young mind has the chance to contribute to solving our shared challenges." As they walked toward the ballroom exit, Amir realized that their story wasn't ending. It was evolving. Every child they reached, every community they empowered, every mind they helped develop would carry forward the fundamental truth that Scarlett had taught him, that the most extraordinary gifts often come in the most unexpected packages. The poor girl selling flowers had indeed silenced the rich billionaire's laughter, not through confrontation, but through the undeniable power of human potential recognized and nurtured. This remarkable story of transformation reminds us that brilliance exists in every corner of our world, often hidden behind circumstances that obscure rather than reveal potential. Scarlett's journey from poverty to global influence wasn't just about individual achievement. It was about what becomes possible when we choose to see beyond surface appearances and invest in human possibility. In our own communities, there are children whose extraordinary minds are waiting for recognition, families whose dreams need only opportunity to flourish, and potential solutions to our greatest challenges residing in the most unexpected places. The question isn't whether such remarkable individuals exist, it's whether we have the vision to recognize them and the courage to support their development. Consider the children in your own community who might benefit from mentorship, the families who could transform their circumstances with just a small investment of resources and belief. Think about how your own assumptions about intelligence, potential, and worth might be limiting your ability to recognize extraordinary gifts in ordinary circumstances. Scarlett's story proves that when we combine resources with recognition, opportunity with encouragement, we don't just change individual lives, we create ripple effects that can transform entire communities and influence global progress. The seeds of brilliance are everywhere around us, waiting for someone with vision to help them grow. What extraordinary potential might you discover if you looked beyond appearances and invested in possibility? The next world-changing mind might be closer than you think, needing only someone who believes in the power of human potential to recognize and nurture its development.